Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Addict's Advocate. I'm your host, Dusty Dean. It is my pleasure to welcome back Ashley Ryan with Holistic Healing Path. How are you, Ashley?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me back.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Happy holidays. I know it's a crazy time of year, but
Yeah.
it's good to see you and spending a Saturday with me. It's been lots happened, over the course of the several months since I've seen you.
Mhm.
I've gone through an investigation of the way that I take care of myself and my own medication,
Mm.
as well as the things that I used to do versus what I do now, and trying to understand, what's the right path.
Yeah.
And so I have obviously a psychologist in my life. I have a psychiatrist in my life. I have a counselor in my life. All people that are important to me. But one of the things that was problematic for me in my recovery was that I deal with obviously bipolar issues, deal with depression, anxiety tremendously. Is that a lot of the psych meds, they just cause weight gain, and
Mm.
it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
It's something that just starts running away from you, and you're like, what is going on here? Like,
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be getting better, not feeling like I'm
Mm.
getting worse in a sense. And my biggest thing was the anxiety. As far as like the depression, I've been good. I've been actually really good.
That's
It's been
good.
amazing. And but I find that I think the anxiety side of bipolar just starts spinning itself. It's a slow, gradual ramp up that happens every day.
Mhm.
So I find it'll come out in the rapidity of my speaking, right? How fast I talk. It will, it'll start feeling like it's frying my nervous system and things like
Mhm.
that. It just makes me uncomfortable. So I used to, obviously alcohol was the major thing for me that I just had to step away from. It
Sure.
would make me literally crazy, but weed was always something I had an interesting relationship with.
Mm.
And weed was always, I'd never smoked the stuff that was a couch lock, that
Yeah.
would have you just drooling out the side of your face.
Yep. Mhm.
It was interesting because it would always just take me right to kind of just kind of get me in a zone and just kind of make me productive. And I never never got lazy from it. My wife had actually always joked back in the day that sometimes she's like, you were the one that gets normal when you smoke
Yeah.
versus other people. And so just in trying to manage that, I just was like, I'm gonna go back to it a little bit, and I'm just gonna see if I can use it to manage my anxiety versus
Okay.
using the things that doctors have prescribed.
Mm.
Um, I've also gone and went and saw a wellness doctor because I wanted to get my hormone levels checked. I
Mm.
just turned 49, and it was like, you know what? I'm wondering if this has something to do with it too. And
Yeah.
she says you're a little bit low on the testosterone side.
Yeah.
Um, and I tell you, since I've taken her vitamin regimen, it's just like it's brought me up to a whole nother level. And life has been just like the energy, the vigor, just the
Mm.
general state of well-being. Everything has just gone up. And I was like, well, this is really fascinating because, our brains are a big chemical mess, right?
Mhm.
And they change throughout time.
Yeah.
And of course, the things that we do to ourselves inadvertently or advertently, can modify those things through life too. And
Mhm.
I'm just like, because at the end of the day, right, it's about effect, right? It's like, what am I trying to achieve? How am I trying to live my life? How am I in my relationships with others? How do I feel in my heart? Um, but yeah, so, and everybody's aware that's in the medical profession in my life. They're aware that I've done this choice. So they really want me to be cautious about, being pathological. Um, and, and they agreed. They're like, unfortunately, some of these psych meds, we don't know how they do what they do. We just know that they do what they do.
Sure. Absolutely.
So what would your response be to someone who came into your life, as a client and would say these same things to you? How would you address that?
So I have mixed feelings about the use of marijuana to treat mental health. I think it's twofold for me. I think I got sober at a time when you just got sober and you figured out how to have a full contact experience with life, and there weren't things like medication assisted treatments. That just didn't wasn't a conversation. I recently celebrated 18 years. My sober anniversary was, yeah, thank you. So 18 years ago, it was a very different landscape of
Hmm.
recovery. And so
Got it.
the version of sobriety that I'm used to personally is one that kind of encourages a full contact experience with life. Now, to double that with my professional career, um, there's I think there's some different opinions. I think that psych meds are phenomenal. I think, people need them and it's an absolutely necessary part of treatment. I understand people's desire to not be on psychiatric medication and to try to opt for something that they consider to be more natural. So I do get it. I am somebody, and I think it's great that you talked a little bit about like the hormones and those kinds of things. I'm somebody who said, like, have you done your troubleshooting across the board before returning to something like a substance like marijuana, especially if you're a person who's in recovery, who has a diagnosed substance use disorder? Have we looked at everything? Have we done a blood panel? Have we tested the hormones? Have we acknowledged what we're eating, our caffeine intake, our sleep hygiene, our screen time? Like, are we looking at the whole kit and caboodle first? Because what I have found um, is that clients that I work with, they are real, I mean, addicts and alcoholics to the core, right? We just want to move toward the solution, what's going to work the quickest. And when there's some adverse psychiatric medications, or there's adverse side effects, people are, oh, I gotta get off. And it's okay. I totally get that. And are we acknowledging the whole piece of the puzzle, right? Because that's really my approach as a therapist, is not so much um, just looking at like the small scope of your recovery. It's really, the sobriety is like this middle section that spans out in all of these directions. And if we're not taking care of ourselves and acknowledging all of these other things, it's going to look really easy to pick up a substance, to pick up marijuana, to pick up, even I know clients who are like, well, I want to start microdosing. And I'm like, okay, like that's a whole nother conversation about treating your mental health. Like, ketamine therapy is a thing now. Like all of these things that, while I totally get it and I do believe there is effectiveness for that, I also do think it's a very slippery slope if you have a diagnosed substance use disorder. Those are not just because they are treatments that work for some people. You may not be some people, right? So, um, and I think that a lot of people that I work with professionally throughout my career, I mean, I've been in the field almost 15 years now. Um, and one of the biggest things that I always kind of come back to is like, well, let's talk about like how you treat your body on a day-to-day basis, right? And it's, yeah, I'm not eating well, I'm not sleeping well, I'm ingesting 5 monsters a day on top of 3 cups of coffee, right? Like, and I'm like, yeah, so your anxiety might be high, right? We might want to think about how all of that stuff, right? I'm talking to an ex and that's stressing me out, right? I'm on 5 different dating apps, like all of these things that are going on. And they're like, but I also think I need to smoke weed at night. And I'm like, okay, no, I hear you. Right? I totally get that you're having trouble sleeping. Could we maybe try to look at some of these other things? And then if we really get all of that other stuff down to a more manageable level and things aren't shaping up the way we want them to, let's talk about the cost benefit, right? Let's have an open discussion. I'm not a therapist who is hard lined on anything other than doing anything that is specifically harmful to yourself or to someone else. But when it comes to exploring the pathways in which someone's going to get better, I do think that it's important to listen to what people think is going to be best for them, right? Because we want our clients, and I know for me, I want my clients to feel like they have a high level of autonomy, that they can make choices. My job is to reflect back all of the ways that those choices can play out positively and negatively. Um, so I don't know that I have a hard stance on introducing those things back. I have a hard stance on introducing those things back when we have not tried other things yet, when we have not worked on the rest of our life and are just thinking that adding a substance while not addressing those other things is going to fix things.
I love it. I love it. It's a great perspective because yes, that's the unfortunate reality with life, right? We've got so much stimulus, so much input, so many things we're going after that. It's like, okay, what actually catalyzed you to go this direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's on the other side of it. It is scary to take psych meds just because it's not like taking something for some pain on a knee.
Right.
It's something that whenever you don't feel right, you start to question, is it the medication?
Mm-hmm.
And it's you're walking through life interfacing with people knowing that you're taking this substance, and then if something just goes cattywampus on you, you're like, oh my God, is this like the moment where I'm now going to have my psychotic break?
Yeah.
And, because I've, and so things get daunting. They get
Yeah.
scary for sure, right? We
It
want to
definitely
trust and
is. Yeah. So, and I can share my own experience with that too, right? So I went through a really, really, really tumultuous divorce process over the last like 2 years. Um, and I have, I'm not somebody who takes medication for psych purposes. I did when I was really early in sobriety, like in rehab, but I think that's just standard protocol to like make sure everybody doesn't like jump around the building all day long, right? But
yeah,
I have never been on them. I'm not somebody who I would generally say that I have mental health diagnoses. It's just not part of my journey. But during this process, it became part of my journey, right? And situational mental health is a real thing. Long-term mental
right.
health is a real thing. And I had people in my life come to me and just be like, hey, I think it's time to really consider that you might need some medication to help you get through this. It doesn't seem like what you're doing is going to sustain you. And it was really hard for me. I really didn't want that to be true. I felt like I wasn't doing enough. I'm like, even though I'm a therapist, right? I still have all of these own internal biases where I'm like, God, I should be able to do this by now. I have, this much experience, all these kinds of things. And the truth is, like, you can't out mental health your mental health. And so, right. So it just became apparent that like I was going to need something. So I went and saw a psych and I got put on medication to manage. I think it was more anxiety that for me, my anxiety manifests as like anger and a very short temper, and I get highly overstimulated and really, really agitated. So I was treating a lot of that, and I was on meds for about a year. And during that time, I had switched medications, right? Because, and full transparency, right? So part of my story is I have eating disorder, and I was on a medication, and then I heard there was another medication that might also help with weight loss, right? So being the great addict that I am, I like go to my doctor and I'm like, hi, can I switch medications, right? And so they did, because they weren't any the wiser, because I didn't allow them to be. And I've noticed things were getting actually worse. Like I started to be more agitated, more all these things. So I saw a new doctor, and and I told him the whole thing. I said, this is what I did. And he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't really know. And he's like, I'm going to tell you that I think you're in a place where it's time to start weaning off. And what I will also tell you is that people who take this medication who don't really need it are going to become more agitated, less patient, more impulse. He's like, you're doing the exact opposite, right? And so my psych helped me wean off. I've been off medication for like 6 months now. I feel relatively back to myself, but I remember during that year that I took it, that feeling of like, do I feel weird today because of the med changes that I'm doing? Do I feel that like it's almost like you're going through your whole life with this like little, I don't know if it's like a secret but just like this idea of like, I take meds, right? Like I've got something else going on. And it's really challenging. And I knew for myself during that year, I really did a lot of looking at myself of like, what are my motivations here? What am I doing? And then I also recognized like I wasn't taking the best care of myself anymore. I wasn't doing some of the things that I needed to be doing. And so kind of as my life stabilized and my relationship stabilized and all those things were getting better, slowly, I could start to see like, oh wow, I've now turned what was a good thing because of my addictive personality. Now I've adjusted it, because that's the nature of this beast, right? Is we love to take a good thing and spoil it. And so I
I'm writing down timestamps for all the great quotes you're giving me already.
yeah,
Let me
right,
take that.
right.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
1400.
it's like
There you
it's
go.
our quintessential chef's kiss is addicts and alcoholics are great for taking a good thing and spoiling it rotten. And that's exactly what I did. And in the process of spoiling it rotten, I spoiled myself, right? And I had to then like do all of this other backtracking work. So I think that's where it's so important to have good supports in your life and to have open relationships, open communication, because I was able to tell people in my life, like, hey, I see what I'm doing and I'm going to need a little bit more support to like get myself to stop doing that. And like the people in my life stepped up and were super helpful and, got me where I needed to go. But I know how that challenge can be with medication and trying to figure out the right things. And, I think the hard part is that there is no arrival point of fixing everything.
Right. Right.
You don't just get to take medication and say, this is the perfect med and it's going to work perfectly for me forever. It's like, the reality is like, you got a couple years maybe, and then you're due for.
You're constantly dialing it in.
Yeah. And that is so hard and so frustrating and can be incredibly daunting to clients. I know that from the work. They're just like, I am just so tired of moving this around and adding this in and taking this away and adjusting. And I'm just like, I know it's so challenging and it is a big ask, right? It's not just, okay, just do it. It's like, no, because then I'm not going to sleep well. Then I feel dizzy for a week. Then I have, it's so hard. And what I try to work with clients and even myself is that reminder that like, it is not, we are never going to arrive at the fixed location. And so how do we work with that while still doing the things we need to take care of our mental health while honoring the fact that this is super hard?
Yeah, so many great points. And I agree with you because it ends up just putting, again, this other weight that we have to carry in life that we sit there and we go, why do I feel like I got to deal with this and other people don't?
Yep.
I mean, people at work don't realize that every single time I say something, I've pushed it through this filter of mental health awareness. And I end up still playing it back regardless, in Monday morning quarterback, everything I do, I'm overthinking, I'm trying to be perfectionist, and it's not my intent. It's just the way that I am.
Yeah.
And then what ends up happening is that you end up getting like, just like you get recovery fatigue, right? You get mental health fatigue. You're like,
Yes.
I'm tired of constantly just, making sure that I'm presenting myself to the world in the way that I should be, And yeah, it is. I can see why it will forever be a struggle just for about everyone. I have someone in my life who just relapsed on alcohol and cocaine. And they were strong in their recovery. And the interesting thing is that once you've had a period of true sobriety, when you've gone through a program, when you've not just kind of cold turkeyed it, I'm not doing it for, October or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You really are aware of yourself. You're aware of the disease. You're aware of, and then you have a relapse. I mean, it rocks people to the core.
Sure.
Because they have the intellect to realize this is what's happening. And it's, again, it just shows the powerfulness of the disease and how cunning it is, how it sneaks up on you, how it does what it does, and then it spins you for a loop. And, I think there's two benefits to obviously going through a program. And one is that you can't come out of it unchanged. You can't, you can't take a first sip and relapse and go, oh my God, it's reared its ugly head again. And so you're in this existential crisis almost, right, with yourself. And then you have to obviously give yourself the grace, the patience, that remove the guilt and the shame, right? Because it's one of two directions. People will freak out and they're like, oh my God, I've relapsed, help. Or people will just be like, I'm going to go down my isolation, guilt and shame road, and I'll see you in a year or two, maybe if I'm still alive.
Yeah.
But the other thing that hit this individual really hard was just the physiological response from using.
Yeah.
And it was just like, again, it was like one of the worst types of almost hangovers, withdrawal episodes, even though she'd been clean for so long. Yeah. It's like, because the body hasn't recalibrated yet, and the brain's still out of whack. And that's why I guess, relapses in sobriety can be very dangerous, right? I mean, they can kill you because the body doesn't know how to receive it. And it's so dysregulated. But, one of the things that has been saving for her is just purely a sober community, I think. And I constantly go back to that because they're the only ones that are going to understand the struggle, right?
Yeah. I think being, so obviously I work in the field and, the recidivism rates of returning clients is, high. Right. And that's the unfortunate part of this, disease in this profession is, you see a lot of returners, and which is good, right? We want them back, and it's sad because you know where they were before they left you or whatever it might be. one of the biggest things that I think is super important is the ability to release ourselves, like you were saying, acknowledge and release the shame. Because I'm somebody, when clients come back, I definitely tell them, like, guilt is good. Guilt tells you that you had a moral compass that is guiding you in the right direction. Guilt reminds you that you're not a sociopath. Guilt says, hey, I have not made the most skillful choice for me. That's good. We want guilt because guilt helps remind us that there's another way of doing my life. If I didn't feel guilty for the things that I did that are unskillful, I wouldn't change them, right? If I didn't have this internal barometer that guilt provides, I wouldn't make changes. It's when guilt manifests into shame, right? Because guilt is, I did something wrong, right? Like I did an incorrect behavior. Shame is, I'm the person that is my value, right? So I can have guilt for saying this was not a healthy choice without saying I'm a terrible person, because those two things are completely separate. So we want to experience healthy guilt while not holding on to that we are defined by the worst decision that we ever made. Because if everybody in this world was valued based on the worst choice they'd ever made, I think we'd have some big issues, right? Like,
Right.
the beauty is that we aren't defined by those most dark or scary or fearful decisions that have kind of dictated parts of our lives. The great thing is that recovery gives us the opportunity to be defined by the choices that we make when we are wanting to move our lives forward, when we're coming back to our spiritual disciplines, coming back to our sober communities, all of those things. And when clients come back in, the first thing that I always try to say to them is welcome back, right? Because it is so important to give them the reminder that it is okay to be back. It's better than the alternative. There's 1,000 other ways that this could have played out, and walking back into my office is like probably one of the best options, right? And when we can give people that grace, because we know that they're not giving it to themselves, right? I know that clients aren't coming into my office and being like, you know what, I'm just really going to take it easy on myself. They're coming, right? They're coming into themselves like wielding the worst things they've ever said about themselves, feeling the worst that they ever could be. So when you're somebody either in a position who works in this field or somebody who has more sobriety time and more, you have to be the person who provides the grace, right? Because they will not get it from themselves just yet. The job of a therapist is to do therapeutic work, but even the larger job of a therapist is to be the biggest reflection of grace and understanding. Because if we're not providing that, if we're not beaming back at the people who meet us, everything is okay, even though it's not, even though it feels like it's not. If the person who's in charge of your treatment, who's here to hand you that life wrap, whether that be a sponsor, whether that be a therapist, whoever it is that is reaching out their hand, the hand needs to come with, it's okay. We're here. We will figure this out together, because addiction is the biggest, the most isolating disease, right? It just shrinks your world so small. And all you really need is one person to say, hey, I can figure this out with you. And that is one of the ways that I have seen clients soften to themselves, is they go, oh, everybody doesn't hate me now. Okay. I thought that they all might, right? I thought everybody in the world was so disappointed in me and just thought I was so terrible and also, and there's one person who's going, hey, it's all good. We're okay, right? We can figure this out. They can kind of see in their own mind's eye that maybe they aren't this horrible human being that they've told themselves they are, because someone else thinks that they aren't a horrible human being.
Right.
And I think that becomes the job of sober communities, the job of therapists, the job of everybody who's welcoming back somebody who made a choice that wasn't the best. And okay, who among us, right? Like,
Right.
that's the most important.
It's one of those things, right, where we literally are drinking a depressant elixir, right, and then we're wondering why we're getting depressed, and we're like,
Yes.
we just gave it to ourselves, and then with that depression becomes all that guilt and the worthlessness and everything. You're just like, wow, it's just you're literally jumping in the lava.
Yep. Hmm.
um, what do you think of self will in recovery? What do you think that what does it play? Does it play?
That's an interesting question because I do think that self will plays a role when you're sober. I think that's the most important distinction is that when you get into sobriety and you get restored the power of choice, right? Because that's what sobriety gives us is the ability to make choices again. When you get restoration of choice, self-will becomes important, becomes necessary. When
Right.
you are in active addiction, in the throes, and out there with little to no support or isolated from your support, I don't think self will plays much of a role because in order for someone to get back into recovery, there usually needs to be a catastrophic push. And that catastrophic push can be anything from homelessness to your wife making you sleep on the couch for the first time in 15 years. Like that word catastrophic is different for everybody. But
Right.
there has to be something that goes and pushes you in and you go, "Oh my God, I see it," right?
Yeah.
Up until then, if it was just about saying, don't do that, stop drinking, stop using, people would have. I tell my clients that all the time that if you could have figured out how to successfully drink and use drugs without burning your life to the ground, I believe you would have by now. I would have, right? I would have done.
We all would have. Yeah.
I'm the
Yeah.
first person that if I could continue to be drinking and using successfully and have the life that I have and all of the beautiful things, you can bet your bottom dollar I would be doing it. Right? I'm not above saying that. I 100%, and I consider myself pretty smart and I haven't figured it out. So I can imagine that you haven't either. Right? And so that's why I know self will has nothing to do with getting sober. It has everything to do with staying sober. Because at the end of the day, there will be times when the only thing between you and wanting to use again will be your determination.
Right.
And there's a million things else that can come with that, but sometimes it's just you by yourself in your room and having to say to yourself, this is just not the choice I'm making today. And there's no one's answering their phone. There's not a meeting to go to. There's not this. I read a book. I did my coping skill and I still feel it. And that is where I think self-will plays a role because we do have to want to stay sober 1% more than we want to go back at any given time. And sometimes that 1% is just you holding yourself accountable because the reality is the longer you stay sober, the less people stay on you for accountability. They just trust you, right? They just start to go, yeah, you're doing it. And people don't check in. Like people don't check in on my sobriety the way they used to, right? At 18 years, everybody's not like, hey, how you doing? Right? They're like, all right, I think you're doing it, right? And it's like, yeah. And will I tell you that this last year of sobriety was probably one of the in more recent years hard won sobriety that I've had in a very long time? 100%. I mean, there were moments where I said to myself, if I could turn down the volume on this, I would without ruining the rest of my life. I wish that I could. And I hadn't been like that in many years. And
Yeah.
it was just me in my kitchen and I live alone and I'm an adult. I'm 36. I can do whatever I want. I have money. I can make any choices that I want. And sometimes it was just me by myself sitting in my kitchen and going, I just know that making that choice ruins everything. And
Yeah.
the only person that could tell me that truth at that moment was me. So self-will does become important. And I think it grows in importance the longer you stay sober because people naturally let off the gas with you because they just start to say, okay. And that's not their fault. That's their right. People have earned the right to stop being scared for my relapse, right? People have
Yeah.
earned the right to let off the gas of checking in on me all the time. that's where it's like, oh, wow, I'm that person for myself now. Not that I don't have people who don't come and look and ask me questions, but I'm not a year sober. Right. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot of times where it's just me and me. And I have to be the person that makes that choice. So I think it grows over time for sure.
Yeah, it's been an interesting topic. I've been hearing it come up a lot lately, and I think that the reason why it's coming up is that you have a lot of people that are non-addicts that are loving addicts, and they're like, this seems so cut and dry to me. Why is this such a difficult thing? And I really wish that we had the ability to bottle up this thing that we get, kind of like you were talking about in the kitchen that day. If we could bottle that up and just like inject it in someone for like, here,
Yeah.
feel this for 30 minutes and tell me what you think about that.
Mhm.
People would be like, oh my God, I get it now.
Yes.
I so get it now.
Mhm.
But one of the things that's really fascinating to me is loving someone in active addiction.
Mhm.
How do we do that? And a lot of people say from afar. Some say this really becomes an education for yourself to first of all understand addiction before you can be able to help someone. And then especially now we have the holidays coming.
Ugh.
It's a very, very, very depressing time of the year. It's interesting because it's especially if it's a year of firsts. I always feel bad for the ones that are experiencing the year of firsts and loss, right? Going through the holidays without someone they love,
Yeah.
and just wanting to dealing with coping with that. What's your advice right now? Do you have a lot of clients that are trying to make it through the holidays and
Yeah.
struggling?
Absolutely. I mean, this is an interesting time of year for me because this is when I got sober. So it's always a time of year of reflection because I would say that it's this time when my life was the worst that it ever was. And I was in the worst parts. And my first holidays that I ever celebrated sober were all in treatment. And so I have a lot of personal affection for people this time of year in recovery because I know that it can be so challenging. Um, my recommendations and what I tell my clients, so I have two versions of that is for my clients, the best thing I can tell you to do is plan. Figure out what you're doing on the days that are big holiday days for you, whatever it is, even if it's not necessarily the, December 25th, if your family always got together on December 16th and that's not going to happen this year, plan. Figure out what you're doing. Do not leave what is going to happen that day up to the last minute because you will surely find yourself wildly disappointed when you have nothing to do because you will have nothing to do. So make your plans ahead of time. Where are you going? Who are you seeing? What restaurant are you going to go eat at? What meeting are you going to? What church service are you headed? Whatever you're doing, figure it out minute by minute. Have your day because I've seen so many people just want to bury their head in the sand and then they wake up on December 25th and they didn't prepare and it hits them harder than it needed to. Not that it won't hit hard in general, but I think a lack of preparedness sets us up for failure. And that's true for anybody in recovery at all times, right?
Right.
So figure out what you're doing a week to 2 weeks ahead of time and confirm those plans. Stay on top of it. If you're going to see family and that's a really difficult time for you, have your exit strategies. Right. So I always tell people that if you're going to situations where you know that it's going to be high trigger for you, you should have a contact person. If you can't bring someone with you, that's like the best option. If you can bring a sober friend, that's wonderful. But not all families are like, hey, bring that random person to our family gathering. Not every family is like, yeah, bring a total stranger that has like 40 days sober. Like they're not all for that. So if you can't bring a friend, have a contact person who's responsible for what I like to call your check-ins. So you check in when you arrive. You have a designated check-in time 2 hours later that if you miss by more than 30 minutes, that person is tasked with calling you on repeat to get you on the phone. And then you have a check-in point when you leave, when you're out. Okay.
I like it.
This person also becomes the classic, if you're on a terrible first date, hi, I have an emergency and need you to leave. They become that person, right?
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
get to call you and you shoot off the text that says, it's time to get me out of here. They call and say, hey, I have an emergency. And you say, oh, wow, I have to go to an emergency. And you leave. And that's it, right? So have that person ready to go for you
Yeah.
because you got to have a way out. What I have seen for clients is they get to these family functions and then they don't know how to leave because they feel bad, they feel like everybody's looking at them, they get anxious, they get awkward, and then they stay. And then the night goes on and more liquor comes out, people get more intoxicated. It just gets
Right.
really hard to be there, and they don't know how to get up from the couch and walk out the front door without feeling like they're being rude, they're being disrespectful, whatever it is, whatever the emotion is. So have that person who's built in to check on you. And if you're struggling to leave, is the way out. Calls you and tells you got to go. And then you go, oh, I'm sorry, I have to go pick up a friend. They really need me. And it is what it is. So
Yeah.
have your plans, right? Those exit people become super, super important. Um, if you're a family member who's celebrating with your loved one for the first time, right? Sober holidays. We have a lot of clients who are going through that. Talk about it. Talk about it ahead of time. It's okay to say, hey, are you comfortable with alcohol being in the house? Do you not want us to drink this year? What is best for your sobriety? I have some clients who are like, yes, please, no alcohol. I want it to be a dry Christmas this year. That would be so helpful to me. And I had a client the other day who said, I would feel so weird if everybody in my family wasn't drinking. Not that they drink to excess, but it would just feel weird because I would know that they're all just not doing it because of me. And that actually makes me more anxious. He's
Right.
like, it actually feels better if everybody just goes on with life as normal and I'm just there. So don't be afraid to have conversations with your person who's in recovery about what's going to make everybody feel safe and supported and seen. It's okay to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is you have a person coming for the holidays who's in recovery. If we don't acknowledge it, then everybody just acts weird and is
Right.
like awkward and it just doesn't go well. So talk to your loved one, right? Have your own plan because it can be triggering for families to have that person back in the house, right? If you're anxious about having them there, what is going to make you feel better? And again, does that mean putting your purse away? That's okay. You're allowed to still do that. Even if they have sober time, you're allowed to say, you know what? It just makes me feel better if like certain things aren't out, or I know I lock up certain medication when they come into the home. It's not because you think they're going to do anything. And an addict who takes that personally has to continue to do work on themselves, right?
Right.
It's not because you think that they're going to fail. It's what's going to make everybody's mind be a little less racy and focus on the fact that you get to spend time together. If your mind is going to be hyper fixated on that medicine cabinet upstairs because you didn't take care of it ahead of time, you're not going to enjoy this holiday anyway. So you don't even have to tell them that you did anything. You can just make all of those safeguards and then it's already in place. Everybody's going to have a different way that they relate to being around each other, especially during the holidays. And just like if your loved one in recovery says, hey, I have to go, my hope is that the family would say, no problem. Don't ask them to stay longer. Don't ask them to stay for another 15 minutes. If your person in recovery looks at you and says, it's time for me to go, then you say, it's time for you to go. I love you. Thanks for coming. If the person who's there, who's not in recovery as a family member says, hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed, person in recovery, your job is to say, is there anything I can do to support you? Not, oh my God, I knew you'd be like this. Right? Don't, no, we're all on the same team here.
Yeah.
Right. So it's good to just know and have those conversations, talk about it, put your own plans in place. There's nothing that you can do that is ever going to make somebody relapse, right? You can't, the 3 C's of Al-Anon, right? You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it, right? So whatever you decide to do is good for you as long as it's safe for everybody. So
Awesome.
planning.
I love it. I love it. Um, so what's interesting for me is when I went through my rehab, I felt like just as far as like relationships, everything was just going to be like just a breath of fresh air. Relationships would be great, and I found that one relationship in particular, one of my closest relationship, isn't what I thought it was going to be.
Mm,
And I've come to, in taking a step back and reflecting and having conversations with this person, is that they were very much my go-to prior to getting sober. I've dumped a lot of things on this person throughout the
Mm,
years. They've known this side of me that everything was intense, everything mattered all the time,
mm,
and was just a very much, especially with obviously the bipolar, the manic side, and then the depression. The whole world's falling apart, and nothing matters anymore. And just they were always my sounding board.
mm,
When I get sober, when I get medicated, and being just everything's so much cooler,
mm.
it was a shell shock to them.
Yeah,
Very much a shell shock because it's like I'm a completely different person in their eyes.
right.
The magnitude of life isn't as heavy as it used to be, thank God.
Yeah.
Things are a little bit more carefree, and but it's been tough navigating that
Mm,
with this person because I know that there was a sense of feeling needed.
mhm.
Obviously prior to sobriety, right, where they were always there for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever had to deal with that from a client perspective, but it's one of those things where it's almost I'm tired of kind of having this discussion because there's nothing that I can do to change back. I mean, I'm not going to change back, obviously,
Yeah.
but I can't. It's almost like I can't articulate what the difference is other than just purely just, hey, my chemicals in my brain are doing better.
Yeah.
you know.
Mhm.
Um, any thoughts on that?
You know, shifts in relationship dynamics when somebody gets into recovery are some of the most interesting things that I think come out of this process, right? Because some relationships are so positively impacted by a person's recovery because they're, you know, they ease up on needing them so much and they become not a person that they're a warden over. They get to become their son again. They get to become their husband again, whoever it might be, right? And then there's these other relationships that lay on a foundation of codependency. Not completely all the way across, but there is a very good layer of that when the person who gets sober starts to become autonomous and becomes independent and starts to be able to self-regulate, right? Whether that be emotionally, financially, physically, whatever it is, that leaves this other person, just like you're saying, without a job. And for some people, they still work through and are working on the fact that they're valuable in a relationship, not because of what they do, but because of who they are. And if that person doesn't know that to be true, when they lose their job, they also simultaneously lose their value.
Yeah,
And that's a really
well said.
challenging thing for codependent dynamics. So I've seen people getting sober, getting better, and their codependent counterpart either directly sabotaging, right? Because
Mm,
they're wanting them to get sick again because they want to feel needed again and want it again and all of these
Yep.
things. Um, Either directly or indirectly, just like kind of circumventing this person getting better. And there isn't anything for the person who is getting better to do other than see that for what it is. And that's where your own personal boundaries come into play of not all relationships are going to carry over into recovery even if they've been there for 20 years. Recovery changes things and it's
Yeah.
really hard. It's very hard to sometimes say, oh wow, I'm going to get sober, and not everybody's coming. And
Yeah.
they may not all be coming in the same way that they were before. Maybe some of them are exactly the relationship that we had in the same level of intimacy, if not more. Maybe some of them become more holiday friends where I see them a couple times a year, where before I was talking to them daily or weekly. Like, not all relationships are going to remain intact. And that's not necessarily because anybody's doing anything wrong. It's just the nature of growing. You don't always all fit the same together anymore. And for the
Yeah.
person who is doing the growing and the changing and is in that process, it's just really important to ask yourself, am I having to squeeze to fit into this relationship? And if I'm having to adjust my size to be in this relationship, whether that's become bigger or become smaller, then I really have to talk to myself a little bit about what that looks like, because we
Yeah.
should just fit in the places we're meant to be, in the
Right.
relationships, in the jobs, in the communities, in the support groups. It should just feel like it fits. It doesn't mean that it's not free of work and it's not free of effort. But it also doesn't mean that when I walk into that space that I go, oh, right, I have to be smaller now because that's what makes this person feel more comfortable, or that's what makes my boss feel better about me, is if I'm not as smart or I don't shine as bright or whatever it is. Like, we want to fit where we go. And
Yeah.
sobriety sometimes shows us, like, oh, wow, I've actually been shrinking to stay here. And now that I'm
Right.
getting better, I don't have to do that to myself anymore.
Yeah. Great, great advice.
Hmm.
This has been great, Ashley. Yeah, it's interesting because when you used to divulge everything and anything, right, and then all of a sudden you've pulled back because the magnitude of life has changed. There's a sense that the relationship has become superficial,
Yeah.
and it's like, well,
When you're
that's
used to trauma bonding and then you realize what
right,
an actual relationship means, people who are
right,
trauma bonded think that it's abandoning.
right.
They perceive that as abandonment, right? Because
Yeah,
they're used to high intensity, high divulging levels. And when that shifts, it's you're abandoning me, you're leaving me, you don't want this relationship as bad as I do, all of these other things. When it's really like, oh, actually, that's appropriate scale, right? Relationships are meant
right,
to, it's not supposed to be so big all the time. It's actually supposed to generally be pretty even keeled with moments of up and down,
right,
not
right,
up and down with moments of even keeled.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, because otherwise, I think, and that's the thing that I realized, and the things you don't realize when you're in active addiction is just you're suffocating people,
Yeah.
right? You're inadvertently, and if they're not aware of it, and or they don't have their own healthy boundaries, then you're just spinning the snowball, and it's going to get ugly, and there's going to be a reciprocation to this when things do change.
Yeah.
Um, whether it be romantic, platonic, whatever, right? I mean, there's, I'll never forget, I had a preacher tell me one day, he goes, we cannot live in love. He goes,
Yeah.
it's too suffocating. He goes, you can do it for a small period of time, but other than that, he goes, life's got to go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Um, Actually, this has been great. The floor is kind of yours. I'm looking at my notes here, and I've everything that I wanted to talk about, and I feel like we've done a great job on, and we believe it. We're almost at 50 minutes already.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to share? How's business going?
Business is good. So I'm actually accepting a new job.
Good for you.
Leaving my current facility at the end of this month, and I'm starting with a new facility as clinical director in after the new year. So I'm looking forward to a little bit of a change. It definitely will give me some space to look at other areas of my life. I've been going through a lot this last 2 years. I've had a lot on my plate, both
Right.
professionally and personally. Um, and, I kind of decided to take a position that it's not so much a horizontal move, but it is a lateral move for a life move. And I'm learning that that's part of healing too, right? Is sometimes it's not about taking on more, it's about taking on less. And for people who
Yeah.
know me in my life, I'm not a person who takes on less. I'm a person who chronically takes on more. Um, and it's so funny that we were kind of talking about like that grace and things. That's kind of what I'm easing into for this next year, is like giving myself a little bit of professional grace that I've been doing this a long time. I don't need to keep killing myself. I can enjoy the professional reputation that I've built. I can enjoy the work that I've done without having to constantly feel this like intense need to prove myself, because that's my own stuff. My own stuff is to
Right.
constantly need to make people believe how wonderful I am, when it's like that's just driven by fear and insecurity and all of these things. So I'm looking forward to a change professionally that gives me a little bit more life balance, and I can start maybe working a little bit more in my private practice. I can start, doing some other modalities that I like to do, that I just like haven't had the bandwidth to do for the last couple years because of everything that's been
Yeah.
going on. So it's a good transitionary period of time for me, which I think is very interesting that it comes at this time of year, just because of getting sober at this time of year. There's just a lot of like rebirth around this time of year, renewal and resetting. And, I'm just looking forward to making a shift in 2025.
Awesome. Well, that's wonderful. Now are you in New Jersey?
I am in New Jersey. Yes.
You were in New Jersey. So you're now moving yourself to a new clinical directorship, which is awesome. Congratulations. And
Thank
then you
you.
obviously still have Holistic Healing Path,
I do.
which is your baby. I'm going to go ahead and obviously I'll put that in the description, all the good contact information for you,
Perfect.
as well as your Instagram.
Yeah.
So that way people can access that.
That's great.
And hey, I appreciate the revisit. This is going to be good. I've got a lot of great information here that I think is going to be beneficial to those out there looking to maintain their sobriety or get sober. So,
Yes.
hey, you have a great holiday. Okay, God bless
Well,
you and
thank
your
you.
family, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Jesse. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me back. Good to see you. Happy
Take
holidays.
care.
Bye.
Bye bye.